I'm a native New Yorker. I was born on Greenwich Avenue, but of French parents who had arrived from Le Havre, France, only a couple of years before, was still very French, and who didn't learn English for years because they wanted me to speak French. So I had a very French sort of environment. And my father was a artiste manqué. He wanted to be a sculptor, but he wasn't able to. And he was a pilot for a while, was in aviation when it was still very dangerous, you know. And when I was born, my mother brought pressure on him, and so he quit, but he worked in the field of development of planes, designing of planes and so forth. But we moved a good deal, so I lived in many places near New York. I never spent a summer in New York. It was too hot, too terrible. And so we lived on Long Island. We lived in different places, Bayshore, East Hampton. And what happened to me was that I drew from the very earliest time. And we had a friend who was a doctor educator, and he thought I had a great deal of talent. And so he was my first school teacher with his son who was my age, private teacher. And it was wonderful because I learned my ABCs and so forth, but we also went to museums, we went to concerts, we did a great many cultural things together, and that started me off in a wonderful way. And after that, it was public schools. I almost went to ethical culture school, but there was a long waiting list. And I almost, a few years later, joined the Elizabeth Duncan School of the Dance. But by then, I knew I wanted to be a painter. Both my father and my mother were very emancipated people. They belonged to a generation of French radicals, actually. You know, there was a great turnover in France at the turn of the century against the established church, against the government. And they were quite involved in that. And anti-militaristic, abuse of any kind, in the belief that the most important thing was to be free, to find your own life, as long as you didn't hurt anybody. But they believed in real freedom, and they believed in creativeness. They believed in the arts. They were very culturally conscious. And my mother played a very vital role in my becoming a full-time professional painter, because she knew, especially then, that women had many things stacked against them. The whole setup of marriage, the whole setup of society. The very fact that women were sort of treated like nice little girls who did pretty pictures, who, amused themselves, but it wasn't that serious. They couldn't compete with men. They didn't have the talent that men did, or the intelligence. That's right. So what my mother did for me was from the start, to tell me that if I was serious, if I really meant to be an artist, I have to have that approach. That I was a person equal to anybody else, that if I had a gift, I should develop it, and that it was up to me not to accept the mores that society had established. So when she even went so far at one time, she said, look, I want you to live a normal life, but I don't think you should get married, because marriage is a trap. And you will find, you know, that suddenly you won't be an artist anymore. Now, I know that has changed in the time from the 20s to now. It has changed greatly, because women have a much better chance of being professionals in whatever they want to be. But the problems are still there. They haven't been solved yet. My father died when I was 15, and I was an only child. And I had to make a decision. We had to decide, did I go on to a further formal education, or did I start immediately? So at 15, I had a scholarship to the Art Students League, and found myself at 15 surrounded by much older people, but some very interesting people. In fact, I was in the sculpture class with Hannah Ludens and with Concetta Scaravaglioni and with Eugenie Gershoy. And so I was at the League for 2 years. The second year I studied with a then very, very good painter, Maurice Stern. And he was forming a school in Rome for the following winter. So he offered me a scholarship, and my mother and I were alone. I raised enough money, extra money, to be able to go to Europe. And I didn't come back for 5 years. On the train back to Paris, there was a very nice American painter. He said, you can't go back to America. You've got to stay in Europe. And he come and meet a friend of mine who was for the summer in a little place called Moret-sur-Loing, on the edge of the Fontainebleau forest, where Sisley worked all the last years of his life. So we went there, and there we met another American painter who said, I know of a studio right here that overlooks the Loing and the little bridge. If ever you've seen pictures of Sisley's of that period, he's got a wonderful one of the bridge and my studio in the background. So we spent the summer there, met another American who said, now, I live in Paris, and I could let you have a little studio for practically nothing, because this friend, Ralph Stackpole, who later became a very well-known California sculptor, left it in my charge. And if you want it, you can have it at rent cost for $5 a month. Adolf Dane came to Paris and married a Russian girl in Vienna, but came to Paris with her, and we became very good friends. And in the summer of 1926, his dealer, Carl Grosser of the Weyer Gallery, came to Paris. And he saw my work, and he asked me to have a show in New York. So my mother and I went in the winter of 27, 28, I had a show in New York. We spent the winter in New York. Came back to Paris, and that following winter I met Jack. It's quite a story, my meeting Jack, because Arnold and I were going to an opening of a Paskin show. But first, we had to go to the American Express, where all good Americans went. And right in front of the American Express, we ran into Jack and Emil Ganzo. And I guess it happened right away. And we went to a cafe and drank beer and ate pretzels. And it was a series of all sorts of very nice things we did together, going to exhibitions, all of us in a group. And we went, you know, Paris, every quarter of Paris has a fair. So that through the year, there's a fair going on in Paris, a little street fair. So we would go find a fair and we would shoot the balloons and the targets and come back with horrible, fizzy, wine and have a party. And we had a very, very nice time. Lucille and Arnold were in Paris. It was a strange year, 1929, with a whole bunch of Woodstockers came to Paris. And we did a lot of things together, a whole group. And then Arnold and Lucille went off to Italy. When they came back, I had married Jack. Okay. And it was curious because they came to call on me and my mother. And she told them that I was gone. I'd married Jack Taylor. And Arnold, in front of Lucille, began to cry, which really was weird, right in front of Lucille. So he was already ready to leave, when he taught Doris Lee in San Francisco, and they came to Woodstock. And then this triangle developed, four ways, because she came with her husband. And it was one of the big, interesting, stories of the year. And he left Lucille, and she left her husband, and off they went together. Then the long history of Woodstock. As a young girl, I could have married a number of people, but like Noguchi, I knew it wouldn't work, and that he shouldn't, for his own sake, he shouldn't get married. He should be a free man. So that didn't materialize. But I wanted somebody that I could respect. I wanted somebody possibly to be an artist so that we would have a great deal in common. And when Jack came to Paris, I saw that was the right person. We were married in 3 months. We were married in May of 29. And we both did landscapes together. We did quite a bit of work. But our money had run out, so we had to come home. And we came, he was coming home, and I was coming to a new home. And my mother came with us, and we were always three, to tell the truth, because she wanted us to be full-time artists. And she made it possible for me to be a full-time artist. She was still quite young. She was only 35 when my father died. And very spirited lady. And she really kept us going. She had a little bit of an income, and whatever we made was added to that. Coming home to the Depression was a problem, but we had this place. We lived very simply, and we did everything together, and we had a very, very good life. When I met Jack and we decided to get married, we begged her to come with us because she was still young and full of life. She was a very gay person, great deal of spirit. And we were all pretty much in the same situation. None of us had any money. But if we pulled together, we could have a very good life, and that is the way it developed. I think one of the reasons it worked is that we were full-time painters, that we were in the studios, both of us. And she, in a way, was the lady of the house. She ran the house. She did everything for us. Jack, in turn, had bought this place, you know, in 26, but he knew all the Woodstock artists. And Paul Feener came one day and he said, I have the place for you, Jack. It's in Shady, and it's perfect. So they came and they saw, and Jack bought it immediately. And this is the little house. The first few years we were here in the summers, not in the winters. And in the winters we were in New York. And Jack was able to continue doing scenic work. But then, when Paramount went to California, moved west, then he did a lot of work for the Schuberts, which then became sort of specialized portraits, English mostly.
Now, how did the Depression affect you both?
Well, this is the strange thing, you know. Having had an early start, I had had a show in Paris before I had one in New York. And then I had 2 or 3 at the Via Gallery, and I did sell. And then Jack had a couple of shows, and he sold some. We sort of took turns in earning enough to see us through. And then my mother had a tiny pension, and we lived so reasonably on so little that we really didn't suffer through the Depression.
So it didn't affect you at all?
No. No, we were, I guess we knew how to live and how to be artists, how to be productive. And Jack was a very good craftsman, and he did frames when, you know, he would do some very fine frames for Spiker or somebody else, or some other friends who had money, and that would help. And in those days, life cost very little, you know, compared to what we pay today. I mean, life was very, very reasonable. And my mother was a marvelous cook, and we lived very well. And you didn't carry all the things that we carry now. No insurance. We had a car, but we used it very, you know, once a week to village or once or twice. Our clothes, my mother made all my clothes and hers. I don't know, you lived on nothing. And when you got together, you didn't spend money on liquor, but you made dinners together, you know. And we were very close to that whole group. We went back and forth, Doris and Arnold for a long time, and Harry and Johnny and the others. It was a lovely life. And, you know, Woodstock in those days was very prominent in the art world. And the exhibitions were really first rate in those days. And the critics all came up from New York. There were, what, 3, 4, 5 papers in New York that had critics. And they all came to Woodstock to review the shows. So you would get a very nice review. You would get a reproduction in the Sunday Times or the World Telegram or the Tribune. And it was very alive. Now, for instance, I sent to the Carnegie in 1930, shortly after I arrived here, and I was accepted. That was quite an achievement. After that, it took a few years before I was on Mr. St. Gordon's list. He had a little book, and he went to all the shows, he went to all the artist studios, and then after a number of years, if he approved of your work, then you were invited, and you were invited for good. He would come every summer here, and he would see you, and you would pick a picture, and you were in the Carnegie. The whole attitude was different. There were many, many shows to send to be exhibited in. And so your routine was really set. You did work. And when we went on a painting trip, like Charleston, then Savannah, then New Orleans, maybe for only a month, I did a tremendous amount of work in Charleston. Did a great many drawings and color notes. Then I would come back and I would develop them. And also, you know, interestingly enough, I think in the early days of Woodstock, the artists communicated with one another. I remember, for instance, when we went to France in '31 for a year, because I still had my little studio over there, and we got another one. And I brought back the French edition of the Delacroix journals. Everybody was excited because they had no English translations yet. So we had parties in this house. Arnold and Lucille, Doris and Russ, and a couple of other people would come, and I would do a running translation of the Delacroix journal. And we would discuss all this. We were interested in discussion, in talking about the problems of being an artist. I don't think I see that very much among the young people today. I think they're more isolated. They are burdened with, you know, they try so desperately to get a gallery, and there are too many of them. And the galleries are pretty cold about it, you know. They're not very sympathetic. I don't think they're willing to take a chance on a young artist who perhaps has promise, but he's not going to sell. I think it's hard, very hard for youngsters.
Can you explain to me conceptually what you're trying to do?
What I'm trying to do is to create a number of forms in color, but very freely, inventing as I go, not knowing exactly at the start just how I'm going to do it. And using, I hope, some unusual colors together, as well as a series of varied shapes. Okay, I think we will print it. There it is. Not very well composed, but it does have the textures that I like, painterly textures. There it is. Okay, when the war broke out, and those years were really terrible, I felt an urge to paint something rather different. And I went into a new kind of subject matter of the circus, of performers, and my color changed accordingly. And so my color, I think, wasn't always dark. My first circus pictures were quite light. I did gouaches, I did some prints, and then slowly it deepened. And then it included the different type of entertainment that took place in the Mardi Gras in New Orleans, which of course was dominated by the black, how shall I say, the carnival figures, the men who held up these enormous lights and walked. I mean, they were really very dramatic. So I have a whole period of that kind of painting. But there was also a lighter side to New Orleans. There was the decorative quality of the city. So that I also, at the same time, started a series of streets which were very, how shall I say, they were in lovely light colors. Landscapes that were like that too, although some of the landscapes I did down there from material of New Orleans were also rather devastated, large areas outside of the city and where the blacks lived. Most of my painting did have a beginning, usually in a sketch. Actually, this print started from a very small sketch that I did in a New York subway. I was very taken. It was late at night, and obviously 3 very tired women. And although I brought some changes, I amplified this woman's head and coiffure and what she had on her head. I separated them a little bit, and of course they're in reverse. But from that original drawing, I also did a painting, which is now in a museum in Connecticut, whose name I forget now. But it's true that a lot of my work was started from a small sketch, and then a small watercolor, or a large gouache, and then finally an oil painting. I hope that my work, some of it at least, will survive. And then I hope that as a human being I showed friendship, that I'm remembered as a generous person, not an aggressive or selfish person, because friendship meant a great deal throughout my life. I think those are the 2 things that I think. The art part is hard to know because even very fine artists can be, discarded easily. Some of them are fortunate enough that they're brought back if they had something to say. Others are lost. So that is the main thing I would like to be remembered for.